My brother got a down payment for his first house the same week. I asked my parents for help with my cancer treatment costs. They said yes to him. They said they'd think about it for me. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not someone who asks for help easily. I grew up watching my mom clip coupons and my dad worked double shifts at the plant in Hamilton, so I learned early that you figure things out on your own. I paid my own way through college. I worked 2 jobs for 3 years after graduation to save enough for my own place. When my doctor told me I had thyroid cancer at 31, my first thought wasn't about the diagnosis. It was about how I was going to manage the time off work. That's the kind of person I am. So when I tell you what my family did, I need you to understand that I had already exhausted every other option first. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in October. My endocrinologist sat across from me in her office in Burlington and said the word so carefully, like she was placing something fragile on a table. Papillary thyroid carcinoma. She explained that it was one of the more treatable forms, that the survival rates were good, that we had caught it at a reasonable stage. She said all the right things, and then she handed me a referral packet, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before I could drive home. The surgery came first, a thyroidectomy, which meant they were taking the whole gland, then radioactive iodine therapy, then what felt like an endless string of follow-up appointments, scans, blood work, medication adjustments. The medical system covered most of it, thank God, but there were gaps. The OHIP coverage was solid for the core treatment, but the time off work gutted me. I was freelancing at the time, doing graphic design contracts, and the contracts don't wait for you to finish recovering from surgery. I lost 3 clients in 6 weeks. My emergency fund was gone by December. I called my mom on a Sunday evening. My aunt was there, visiting for the weekend, which I didn't know until I heard her voice in the background. I told my mom I was struggling a bit financially and asked if they might be able to help me bridge the gap for a couple of months while I got back on my feet. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was asking for a loan. My mom said, "Let me talk to your father, we'll figure something out." That was the last time it was mentioned for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, my brother announced he and his girlfriend had found a place in Oakville. A townhouse. He sent the family group chat a photo of the listing, all excited, and within 48 hours my parents had committed to helping with his down payment. Not a loan. A gift. My dad called it, investing in his future. $30,000. I found out from my aunt, not from them. She called me a few days later, just to check in, and mentioned it casually, the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows. She caught herself mid-sentence when I went quiet. "Oh, sweetheart, did they not tell you?" I said I was fine. I told her not to worry about it. I got off the phone and I sat at my kitchen table, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since the night of my diagnosis. It wasn't really about the money, or it wasn't only about the money. It was the arithmetic of it. The way my situation had been, we'll think about it, and my brother's situation had been, of course, absolutely, whatever you need. The way nobody had called to check on me in 2 weeks, but the family group chat had been active for days with excitement about the new house. The way cancer, apparently, was less urgent than a down payment on a townhouse in Oakville. My aunt's name is Cora. She is my father's older sister, and she has always been the kind of person who notices things. She notices when you're not eating. She notices when you've been crying. She notices when a family is performing closeness instead of actually practicing it. She lives alone in Guelph, and she drives a 10-year-old Subaru, and she has never once made me feel like a burden for needing something. She started showing up more after that phone call. She drove to Burlington twice a month to take me to my follow-up appointments. She sat in waiting rooms with her crossword puzzle and a thermos of tea and never complained about the drive. She brought groceries when she came. She helped me organize my medication schedule on a spreadsheet because the thyroid hormone replacement dosing was complicated and I kept getting confused. She figured out which insurance receipts I could submit for tax credits and which forms I needed to complete. Because somehow I had never been told that some of those costs were deductible. She did all of this quietly. She never announced it to the family. She never sent updates to the group chat. I noticed at some point that she had also started writing things down. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much of it. She was sitting at my kitchen table while I was in the other room, and when I came back she had a small notebook out and she was writing something. She put it away when I came in and asked if I wanted more tea. I assumed she was making a grocery list, but then it happened again. After a particularly rough phone call with my mom, one of those conversations where everything sounds supportive on the surface, but leaves you feeling worse than before, I found my aunt sitting very still with that notebook in her lap. She wasn't writing. She was reading something she'd already written, and her expression was the kind of expression you make when you're trying not to say anything before you're ready. I asked her what she was keeping track of. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "The truth has a way of getting blurry over time. I'm just making sure it stays clear." I didn't ask again, but I started paying attention. My brother moved into his townhouse in March. There was a whole thing about it. My parents drove down with a truck full of furniture they'd bought him from a place in Mississauga. My mom spent a weekend there helping him set up the kitchen. My dad assembled shelving units. They posted photos. It looked like a catalog. I was in the middle of my radioactive iodine isolation that same weekend. If you've never heard of it, the treatment requires you to stay completely isolated for several days because your body is briefly radioactive. No close contact with other people. No visitors. You eat off paper plates and sleep in a separate room and try not to touch anything you'll have trouble wiping down later. The protocol was 3 days minimum. I did it alone in my apartment. My mom texted on the first day, "Thinking of you. How are you feeling?" I told her it was rough. She said, "Rest up. You'll be through it soon." Then the conversation shifted to whether my brother's new couch had been the right color. I put my phone face down on the counter and didn't pick it up again for 2 days. My aunt called me every morning of those 3 days. She couldn't come in, obviously, but she stayed on the phone with me for an hour each time. She talked to me about nothing and everything, about the garden she was trying to start, about a documentary she'd watched, about the Subaru making a noise she needed to get looked at. She was just there, on the other end of the line, making sure I wasn't completely alone. There is something about being seriously ill that clarifies relationships very fast. I don't mean that as a platitude. I mean it in a specific, almost clinical way. The people who love you performatively will send you a nice text and consider themselves supportive. The people who love you actually will sit in a waiting room in Guelph in February and do a crossword puzzle while you're having blood drawn for the 4th time that month. I was learning the difference. By spring I was improving. My levels were stabilizing. I'd picked up a few new contracts, and I was starting to feel more like myself. I was also starting to see my family more clearly than I ever had before. My parents had always presented themselves as the kind of family that shows up. It was part of their identity, both of them. My mom talked about family loyalty the way some people talk about religion. My dad coached my brother's hockey team for 6 years. They were always at the school concerts, the graduation ceremonies, the milestone moments. They were very good at the visible things. What I was beginning to understand was that the visible things were the whole point. The performance of family was more important to them than the actual practice of it. When my brother needed something that came with a story to tell, a down payment, a furniture run, a housewarming, they showed up. When I needed something quiet and unglamorous, like someone to sit with me through a radioactive isolation weekend, there was nothing. I mentioned this to my aunt one afternoon. We were sitting on my balcony, and I said it out loud for the first time, that I thought maybe the love in my family had always been more conditional than I'd realized. That maybe I'd been working very hard for a long time to earn something I was never actually going to receive. She didn't disagree. She didn't rush to defend them either. "How far back do you think it goes?" she asked. I thought about it. I thought about my university graduation, where my parents had left early to get to my brother's hockey playoff game. I thought about the year I got a promotion at my old firm and called my mom to share the news, and she spent most of the call asking whether my brother had told me yet that he was thinking of proposing to his girlfriend. I thought about Christmas most Christmases, the way the conversations always circled back to him. "A long time," I said. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "I know." I realized then that she had been watching longer than I had. Summer arrived and my brother got engaged. It was a whole production. An elaborate proposal, a video, a party at my parents' place. The engagement was celebrated the way major life events are supposed to be celebrated. My mother cried happy tears. My father gave a speech. I stood in their backyard and smiled and said the right things. Nobody asked how I was doing at that party. I had finished my last treatment scan 2 weeks earlier and gotten a clear result. Nobody knew, because I had stopped sharing that information with people who didn't ask. My aunt squeezed my hand at one point and didn't say anything. That was enough. The wedding was scheduled for the following June. As the date approached, my parents became completely consumed by it. I understood that, to some extent, a wedding is a big thing. But the degree to which everything else ceased to matter was striking. My mom went to dress fittings, venue tours, florist consultations. My dad was put in charge of the rehearsal dinner and took the role very seriously. Every phone call became about logistics. I was doing better by then, genuinely. I had rebuilt my client base, I was stable medically, I had started therapy and it was helping. I didn't need as much as I had the year before. But I was still their daughter. I was still a person in their lives. I started noticing that I was only ever brought up in the context of the wedding. Was I planning to bring a date? Did I have something appropriate to wear? Could I help address envelopes? I was a logistical element of the event, not a person they were curious about. My aunt kept coming to see me. She had been unusually organized lately. She organized things anyway, she was always organized, but there was a particular quality to her focus over those months that I couldn't quite name. She had folders on her laptop she didn't open in front of me. She had started using a second notebook. One time I walked into my kitchen, and she had her phone out, taking a photo of something on my counter, and I realized it was a printout of a medical bill I'd left there. When she noticed me, she didn't look embarrassed. She just said, "May I keep this?" I said yes. I didn't ask why. I trusted her. I didn't need to know every step of what she was doing. Whatever it was because she was paying attention. And paying attention was something she had been doing for a very long time. The rehearsal dinner was a Friday night at a restaurant in Burlington that my father had rented out for the evening. Family on both sides, close friends, probably 60 people. I sat near the end of a long table, with my aunt on one side and a cousin I rarely saw on the other. My parents were at the center of everything, visibly proud, completely in their element. My brother and his wife-to-be glowed in the way that people do at the start of things. It was a nice evening, objectively. The food was good. People were warm. And then my aunt stood up. She didn't make a scene of it. She didn't announce herself dramatically. She simply stood, and she waited until the room noticed her. And when it was quiet, she thanked my father for organizing the evening, and said she had a few words she wanted to share before tomorrow. People settled in. Everyone expected a toast. "I've been part of this family for a long time," she started. "Long enough to know that we are very good at celebrating the moments that are easy to see. Tonight I want to talk about the moments that are harder to see." My father's smile went a little stiff. She opened a folder. She talked about the October I was diagnosed. She read from a timeline she'd written, precise and factual, describing the treatment plan, the financial shortfall, the phone call I made asking for help, and the response. She had written it down, all of it, the dates, the amounts, the words that had been used. She talked about my brother's down payment, also factually, the amount, the timing, the conversation that had been shared with her. She talked about radioactive iodine isolation weekend, and she described what that isolation entails, for the people in the room who didn't know, and she noted who had driven me to appointments that winter, and who had called me every morning of those 3 days, and who had done none of those things. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't accuse anyone, she simply read from what she had documented. Then she went further back. She had a second section, and this one covered years. She talked about specific moments she had witnessed, events she'd been present for, times she had noticed that one child in the family had been given without question what the other child had been asked to wait for or simply denied. She had dates. She had examples. She had, I realized, been keeping track for much longer than just the past year. My mother said her name sharply. "Cora." My aunt looked at her calmly. "I'll be finished in a moment." She closed with the clear scan result. She said I had received it 2 weeks before the engagement party, and that I had stood in that backyard and smiled. And not one person had known to ask, because not one person had been paying attention. Then she raised her glass of water, not wine, because she doesn't drink, and she said, "I want to celebrate my niece tonight. She has been through something very difficult this year, and she has come through it with more grace than most of us could manage. I'm proud of her." She sat down. The silence in that room was unlike any silence I have experienced at a dinner table. My father was the first to speak. He said it was an inappropriate time and place. He said my aunt had made things up or misremembered them. My mother agreed with him quickly, and I could see her eyes moving around the room, calculating the damage. My brother looked like he didn't know where to look. But something had already shifted. My father's sister, who was seated 3 chairs down, asked a question. She asked it quietly but clearly. She said she seemed to remember that my niece had asked for help last year, and she wanted to understand what had been decided. She was looking at my parents when she said it. My mom started explaining, and the explanation, even as she gave it, sounded thin. It sounded like what it was, which was a series of reasons that had seemed sufficient at the time, and did not hold up to being said out loud in front of 60 people who were now paying close attention. Someone else spoke up. An older cousin who had been quiet all evening said she had noticed for years that things seemed to work differently depending on which of us was asking. She said she hadn't felt it was her place to say anything. She said she was saying something now. I watched my parents' faces as the room gradually stopped being manageable for them. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I had not asked my aunt to do any of this, and I had not known it was coming. And the experience of being spoken for by someone who had simply paid close attention was something I had never felt before. It was disorienting and overwhelming, and somewhere underneath both of those things, it was also a relief so profound I didn't have words for it. My brother sat very still through most of it. He didn't say very much until someone asked him directly whether he'd been aware of the parallel, and he said he hadn't thought about it that way, and I believed him. I think he genuinely hadn't. That might be the most clarifying thing about the whole situation. The favoritism had been so normal to him that it had been invisible. The dinner ended awkwardly. Some people left early, some stayed and talked in small clusters in a way that had clearly shifted from the mood an hour before. My aunt drove me home. We didn't talk much in the car. When she pulled up to my building, I asked her how long she had been planning it. Since the isolation weekend, she said. That was when I understood it wasn't going to correct itself. I asked her why the rehearsal dinner and not something else. She was quiet for a moment. Because they were going to spend tomorrow celebrating the best version of themselves. I thought someone should say something true before that. I didn't go to the wedding. That's a decision I've had to sit with, and I won't pretend it was simple. My brother married someone lovely and I wish them well, and I still think not going was right. Not as a punishment, and not as a statement. I just didn't have the energy to perform a closeness that I no longer believed in. Not in a room full of people who now knew exactly what I had been trying to process alone for the better part of a year. My parents were upset with my aunt for a long time afterward. I think some part of them still is. The narrative they had maintained for years, the good parents, the close family, the people who show up, had been examined in front of the people whose opinion mattered to them most, and found to be incomplete. That is hard to recover from, not because the accusation is unfair, but because it isn't. My brother called me in July, a few months after the wedding. It was a real conversation, longer than any we'd had in years. He said he had been thinking about what came out at the dinner and that he was starting to see some things he hadn't seen before. He didn't over-apologize. He didn't make it about himself. He just said he was sorry it had taken that long and he wanted to do better. I don't know yet what that looks like, but I'm willing to find out. My parents and I are in a different place now. We're not estranged, but we're not the same either. Some of the conversations we have these days are more honest than anything we managed in the 30 years before them. My mom admitted, carefully and with a lot of qualifications, that she thought she had probably handled the previous year badly. My dad hasn't said as much, but he drove to Burlington last month and took me for dinner and paid, and he asked how it was going and actually listened to the answer. It's slow. I'm not sure it will ever be what I needed it to be when I was sick and alone in my apartment during those 3 days of isolation, but I've stopped needing it to be. I found other things to hold on to. My Aunt Cora comes for tea on the last Sunday of every month. We sit in my kitchen and we talk for hours and she updates me on the Subaru situation, which remains ongoing and increasingly dramatic. She never talks about that dinner unless I bring it up. She did what she did because it was the true thing to do, and having done it, she moved on. I think about something she said to me once, earlier in my treatment, during one of those long phone calls when I was isolated and scared and trying to find something solid to hold on to. I had told her I felt invisible. Like something had been happening to me, something real and serious and frightening, and the people who were supposed to see it had simply looked somewhere else. She said, I see you, and I've been paying attention longer than you know. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I do now. There are people in your life who love you by showing up to the things that look like love. And there are people who love you by sitting in a car in a hospital parking lot in February, by writing things down in a small notebook, by standing up at a dinner table when the room is full, and saying the thing that nobody else was willing to say. I was lucky enough to have one of those people. That turned out to be enough.